I wanted to share a chapter from Arthur Kemp's March of the Titans. It's a really well-written history book in 2 volumes. Actually, I think there's more volumes than that available now. But Arthur Kemp is a really good researcher and historian whose work has influenced my thinking on history and other matters quite a bit. This is a really great chapter. It's chapter 6, entitled To the Ends of the Earth, Lost White Migrations. And because a lot of this material is necessary in order to understand some of the conclusions I've come to, I can't really talk about certain conclusions I've reached without sharing this material. So I'm going to just read this chapter straight through, probably interjecting some of my own thoughts in between. In addition to the great Indo-European migrations, several other waves of white migration occurred, varying in number, influence, and reach, the most spectacular being a white settlement in North America dating from approximately 7000 BC. Knowledge of these migrations had been lost for centuries. Due to relatively recent archaeological finds, many have now been rediscovered. In this way, Nordic and white Mediterranean remains, sometimes preserved naturally, sometimes preserved through artificial means, have been discovered in China, the Canary Islands, and in North America. Some are thousands of years old. The discovery of these mummies shows without question that early white migrations across seas and continents took place. It's just the exact number of individuals who undertook these migrations, which is still a matter of debate. The Aryans comprised one of the most famous eastern migrations of Celtic peoples into the Far East, reaching the Taklamakan Desert, situated between Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tibet, in China around 1500 BC. Now, by the way, I read a lot, but I haven't heard lectures on this stuff. Most of what I know, I only know through reading. Because of that, sometimes I know words, but I don't necessarily know how those words are pronounced, especially if they're kind of exotic foreign words. So some of these names, places, and so on, I might be pronouncing wrong. I hope you'll forgive me for that. I'm going to pronounce everything the best I can, just based on how they're spelled phonetically. Remarkably, this great migration was unknown until the 1977 AD discovery of 3,500-year-old graves of these people. Now, because I'm reading from the Kindle edition, I don't think I'm really able to copy the pictures and paste them here. I highly recommend you actually buy the book, but I'm going to read some of the descriptions of the things pictured here. A close-up of a 3,000-year-old, unmistakably white Tocharian male, one of many unearthed from the graveyards in the Taklamakan Desert in western China. This mummy is on display at the Xinjiang Museum, Urumqi, China. Uromqi. Good luck with that. I sure as fuck can't pronounce it. There's another picture shown of a Tocharian female mummy with long flaxen blonde hair, perfectly preserved in ponytails. She has been dated from 1500 BC and was discovered in the Zaganluk Cemetery in Taklamakan Desert. Items of woven material identical to Celtic cloth definitively proved the Indo-European origins of the Tocharians, who not only built the fantastic Silk Road cities, which today lie deserted, but who are also credited with bringing Buddhism, horses, the saddle, and ironworking to China. Now, at this point, I just want to interject. I've been interested in Buddhism for a long time. I don't remember exactly when it was the first time I read about Bodhidharma, the guy who brought Buddhism to China, but he's described as having red hair and blue eyes. And of course, Buddhism came from India And of course, anyone that's familiar with the Aryan invasion will know that in ancient India, the upper classes, which Buddha would have belonged to, were Aryan. Some of the oldest descriptions and statues and so on of Buddha show him with blue eyes. But let me continue reading. As a result of the natural dryness of the environment, many of the corpses are almost perfectly preserved, with their reddish blonde hair, long noses, round eyes, and finely woven tartan clothing, usually associated with the Celts in Scotland, showing undeniably white racial traits. The Chinese civilization always contained stories of blue-eyed and blonde-haired leaders who were the originators of Buddhism and the first leaders and organizers of Chinese society. These stories were always regarded as pure legend, until the 1977 discovery of the graveyards of the Aryans. The mummies are unequivocally Nordic racial types. The graveyards lie near the ruins of the great Aryan cities, built along the famous Silk Route. It is beyond doubt that whites settled in China, and the Chinese legends of white influence on that civilization have a basis in fact. These people have become known by the language which they spoke, Aryan. The civilization which they built consisted of great cities, temples, and centers of learning and art. They were also the builders and maintainers of the original Silk Road, the path for trade between the West and China. It was originally thought that the Chinese built the great cities along the Silk Road, but the discovery of the remains of the original people of this region shows that the impressive ruins, which still lie undisturbed along that road, are the remains of a great lost white civilization. Now at this point I just want to interject again that if you look at the dates and kind of the general time period, this might have some relationship to the Israelite nation at its peak around the time of King Solomon. And of course, as I've discussed elsewhere, the more I've looked into it, the more I've become absolutely convinced that the ancient Israelites, like the ancient Egyptians, were also white, and they had great trade routes all over the place. It was a fairly international empire. The first white mummy in the region was discovered by accident in 1977, after shifting sands uncovered a female corpse whose body had been mutilated, presumably in some act of war. Now keep this in mind for when we get to other apparent genocides that took place in the Americas as I continue this series. And I probably am going to have to divide this into parts because there's so much to talk about, so much to read and share. Excavation around her corpse uncovered a further 16 mummies, so perfectly preserved by the desert that traces of tears were found on the face of a mummified infant. So I'll just go ahead and interject here that what I think was going on here was a slaughter, a kind of race war and genocide. But just file that away in your mind for now. It will, I think, eventually become more and more apparent as we progress in this study. Fully dressed bodies were found wearing finely woven woolen textiles with Celtic patterns, leather shoes, and jewelry. I just want to emphasize that Celtic patterns thing. That seems very strange, doesn't it, in ancient China? The desert conditions proved so exceptional that even pieces of bread used as offerings were preserved intact alongside what is the world's oldest saddle. In one grave, excavators discovered a saddle cover and a pair of trousers with drawings of humans on one leg. One face had blue eyes. In 1980, a blonde-haired mummy was found in Lowlan, China. The mummy was radiocarbon dated as being from 1800 BC. A reconstruction of the mummy, named the Beauty of Laolan, as used on separatist literature in the region, which to this day shows a large degree of non-Chinese ancestry among its population. By the early 1990s, over 1,000 Nordic corpses, had been uncovered from the graveyards in the region, called Wapu. But by 1999, the Chinese government had halted further archaeological expeditions to the area, quite likely for fear of exposing yet more ancient European faces to the world. Now, I just want to point out that, if they found over 1,000 from that long ago, that seems to point to there having been a very, very large population. Because, how many bodies wouldn't have been preserved? It's actually remarkable that there's so many that were so well preserved. And so we have to assume that this is a very small percentage. The current inhabitants of the surrounding lands, who are obviously not pure Chinese, and who speak a form of Turkish rather than Chinese, have been agitating for independence for some time. The discovery of the white mummies has served to highlight their racial and ethnic differences from the Chinese, and the issue has become a political hot potato for that country's government. However, some of the mummies, which have already been uncovered, are still on display in a local museum, while others lie in storerooms, slowly deteriorating. Ancient white influence was not limited to the western parts of China. A genetic study published in the journal Molecular Biology and Evolution, Volume 17, pages 1396 through 1400, in 2000, titled Genetic Structure of a 2,500-Year-Old Human Population in China and Its Spatiotemporal Changes, came to a remarkable conclusion. The Chinese and Japanese scientists who authored that report found that the city of Linzi, located in the far eastern seaboard province of Shandong, had over the past 2,500 years undergone massive changes, and that even today, the population showed greater genetic similarity to present-day European populations than to present-day East Asian populations. The report continued, the 2,000-year-old Linzi population had features that were intermediate between the present-day European, 2,500-year-old Linzi populations, and the present-day East Asian populations. These relationships suggest the occurrence of drastic spatiotemporal changes in the genetic structure of Chinese people during the past 2,500 years. Okay, well, it may not necessarily point to changes in the Chinese people. It may actually point to demographic shifts and migrations. This report proved conclusively that ancient Europeans had penetrated China right through to the Pacific Ocean. Some Chinese legends maintained that the first Chinese emperors who brought unity and civilization to China had fair hair or blue eyes. Now, where do we see this theme again? We also see this in the Americas, where they have myths and legends about fair-haired, blue-eyed people who brought civilization to them. And we'll get to that a little bit further on in this discussion. The new finds are forcing a re-examination of old Chinese books that describe historical or legendary figures of great height with deep-set blue or green eyes, long noses, full beards, and red or blonde hair. Scholars had once scoffed at these references, but it now transpires that they were correct. One of these accounts can be found in the Song to the Great General Lu by the Chinese poet Li He, circa 790 to 816 AD. Now keep in mind that that time period would have been around the time or just a little bit before the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria, was taken into Assyrian captivity. I'm not going to read the whole poem. I will just emphasize the line that it's here to illustrate. Gleaming ore from Scarlet Hill, hero of our time, green-eyed general, you well know the will of heaven. Green-eyed general. And again, Bodhidharma, the guy that brought Buddhism to China, is described as having had red hair and blue eyes, I believe. A lot of indicators that Buddha also had blue eyes. So there's a lot of things that are kind of pointing in the same direction here. Over time, these white people mixed with the neighboring Mongoloid tribes and slowly vanished from history as a distinct group. The physical features of the people currently living in Western China clearly show part white and part Mongoloid traits, with blonde hair not unknown. Thus it was that the white civilization of ancient China vanished through racial mixing, with only the crumbling ruins of their cities and their corpses remaining as silent witnesses. Now, like I said, I am skeptical that this vanishing was only the result of miscegenation. I think there was probably slaughter and genocide involved. So that seems like a good place to end the first part of this discussion. I will record and upload the next few parts shortly after. But this evidence of a white Aryan migration through China and Asia all the way through to the Pacific Ocean seems like a good place to start. As we will see as we progress, there's very strong evidence that the earliest settlers in the Americas were also white Aryans. How did they get there? Well, some probably came across the Atlantic on the northern parts, but when we see so much evidence of white Aryan people migrating through Asia, it's extremely likely that they came across through, the north around Alaska too, and migrated eastward and southward. This is, of course, the route that, most people agree the so-called Native Americans probably took. But they may not have been the first ones to take it. They may have taken it later, following the first settlers of North America, who I believe were white or Aryan. And I believe another genocide or slaughter took place, and there's a lot of evidence pointing toward that. I will begin to get into that in the next part of this series, so stay tuned. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, and be sure to subscribe to my channel on BitChute, because I think it's extremely likely that this channel on YouTube is probably going to be removed eventually. So you need to follow me on BitChute, or I'm just going to disappear one day and you won't know where I am. Be sure to subscribe to my channel here. I'm going to be posting both here and on BitChute, but I encourage everyone to begin migrating to BitChute. Not just for me, but most other content producers who you like, if you like my content, are also seeing the writing on the wall and recognizing that they are under attack here on YouTube. There's already been purges. There's going to be more. It looks like the way things are going now, in the new clause, YouTube is now saying that, they're going to remove channels that they deem to be commercially unviable, whatever that means. So basically that's going to mean the same kinds of channels that they're demonetizing and have been demonetizing, and that they've deemed to be not advertiser friendly. We're going to see a lot more channel removals. So again, be sure to follow me on BitChute, and I will post the next few parts of this discussion there. Thanks for listening. Peace.